Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We are Myth Vision. Welcome back to Myth Vision Podcast. I have Professor Alexandre Beider. How are you?
Hello, Alexandre Beider.
Beider. I
I'm fine.
apologize. Well,
No problem.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time, and you're going to be educating us today. We're going to be debunking the Khazar myth, and I want to just introduce you to our audience since nobody has ever seen you on my channel before. Dr. Alexandre Beider holds one doctoral degree in mathematics, Moscow Institute of Physics and Technology from 1989, and another in Jewish studies. And is this pronounced Sorbonne?
Sorbonne.
Sorbonne, Paris, 2000. He has written a series of reference books dealing with the etymology of Ashkenazic and Sephardic surnames and Ashkenazic given names in 1993 to 2019. His book, Origins of Yiddish Dialects, published by Oxford University Press in 2015, sheds light on on the early stages of the development of Yiddish. Beider was born in Moscow, Russia, and since 1990, he lives in Paris, France. So welcome to Myth Vision, and I want to give a plug, letting people know if they want to learn more, they want to find out more about this whole topic. You have many books you've published on Amazon that they can go and get. Which one, if there's somebody who's new to the topic and they're not well read on the matter, which book would you recommend that they get?
It depends on the interest of person, because my books are all very scholarly. So, and all of them are either etymological dictionaries of surnames or of given names, or a historical linguistic study of Yiddish. So they are for special audience, I would say, especially for Yiddish, but for surnames and given names, no, where they can be easily read by persons with just a general culture, because it's there is no need to be a linguist to understand them, of course.
Okay. Well, check out Amazon. Go get you a copy if any of these interest you and you want to dive deeper. He has a YouTube channel as well. Not sure if you're going to continue promoting more work on there, but people can go subscribe to your YouTube channel. Go check out Myth Vision's Patreon. It helps support us in doing what we're doing, dealing with the Khazar myth today. I have plenty of videos that I've done that are not released to the public that you have access to, and you have direct access to contacting me through messages on there so we can personally chat. All of that stuff, become part of the family. I'm also leaving to Israel, Palestine here October the 20th, and I won't be back till November the 2nd. I'm going on tour with Dr. James Tabor, and we're going to be walking and seeing some archaeological sites for early Christianity. So be on the lookout for that. Also, we have courses in the description. So for those of you who want to learn more, go down, sign up for one of the courses. Got them with Bart Ehrman, Ancient Greek Mysteries, the whole nine. Now, with that being said, Dr. Beider, what do you have in store for us today? Maybe I'll mention one thing as we get into your presentation. There is this, I guess you'd say, hypothesis that was promoted about Jewish people, and that they are really not Jewish people. They originate as Khazars. So like, they don't really have an origin. And I can't remember the scholar who wrote the 13th tribe that was trying to defend Jews from anti-Semitism, but it turns out that it actually promoted anti-Semitism because it says you don't have an origin. You know, you guys started in as Khazars. You're not really Jewish. And I hear this promoted a lot on the internet. There are people who try to act like Jews are not a national homogenic group. We don't even know who they are. They might be Khazars, who knows? And like they're promoting this kind of idea that I think is a myth. Hopefully we can debunk this today.
Okay, thank you. Can I share my screen now?
Please.
Yeah, okay. Share screen, entire screen, share.
All right. You are sharing now.
Okay, hello. So I would like to speak today about Khazar or pseudo-Khazar origins of Ashkenazic Jews, and there will be two parts. The first part is I will expose what is the theory which is supported by some numbers, by some authors, and what are the methods, arguments they use to back their theory, and how I consider, what is my consideration about their methods and their arguments. And then second part, I would like to show some other methods, some other arguments that go against surely this Hazard theory. So Hazard theory. So what is the, if I oversimplify a scheme of the genesis of Jewish communities in Eastern Europe that appears in manuals, in textbook, we can say that the traditional, the mainstream authors say Jews or Ashkenazic Jews, their ancestors originated in Western Germany, in the Rhine Valley, and some of their ancestors came from France, others came from Italy, and from this area, West Germany, we came to Central Europe, to Poland, and from Poland we went to Eastern Europe, what was 30 years ago Soviet Union, otherwise before, during the previous century, it was a Russian Empire. This is I can say that this is a mainstream approach. There is another approach, alternative, which speaks about the kingdom of Hazaria. This kingdom existed during the last centuries of the first millennium, Common Era, and the idea is that from that area, Khazars who were converted to Judaism went to Eastern Europe. So you see here the direction of migration is totally opposite for the mainstream. And of course, these two theories are totally incompatible. From where what do we know really about Hazaria, a Hazarian kingdom? The historical basis for this. From some non-Jewish, mainly Muslim texts, we know that during the 10th century, the Jewish religion was professed by at least the ruling elite of this kingdom. This kingdom was formed by semi-nomadic Turkic people, and so according to some sources, which are never direct, we learn that during the 10th century, the king and the most powerful people of this kingdom were professing Judaism. And there are some references to the 9th century, but they are rather doubtful. The majority of references correspond to 10th century. In Jewish sources from mid-10th century, we have a so-called Hazarian correspondence. So it's a correspondence, it's a letters between one of the Jewish dignitaries at the court of Cordova in Spain, of course, at that period, this part of Spain was under Muslim rule. And so this person who was called Hasdai ibn Shaprut, he corresponded, he sent a series of letters to the ruler of Hazaria, the King Joseph, who answered him. And so there are copies of this correspondence. Some scholars debate about the authenticity of this correspondence, but generally people agree that at least what we can be sure that this correspondence dates from the Middle Ages. It's not a recent document, of course. What we also know for sure from historical documents that the Hazarian Empire collapsed during the 1960s when it was conquered by Russian military forces, Sviatoslav, and the empire was collapsed, but there are still some references to Khazars during the next century, but the last historical reference correspond to the start of the 12th century. And after that, there is no reference at all to Khazars in historical references. And when I say a turn of the 12th century, it's not a reference to Jewish Khazars, it's just a last known reference about Khazars as a whole. Jewish references all correspond to 10th centuries only. From archaeology, what do we know? There were many expeditions organized in 20th century, 21st century, and during this expedition, there were numerous objects that were found in this area, which is situated north to the Black Sea and Caspian Sea. And there were many, many objects found, but very, very few of them correspond to Jewish religion. And even if they correspond to Jewish religion, we cannot be sure whether they belonged to Jews who migrated to this area or to people, local Turkic people who got converted to Judaism. We just don't know. But in any case, the number is very small, and this suggests that Judaism was not really widespread in the empire. It had some propagation, but very limited. So these are the historical elements. And the idea that Jews from Eastern Europe descend from Khazars who were converted to Judaism. It appears already in some early studies, which, for example, you see here the book by Austrian diplomat and the amateur Orientalist Hugo von Kuchera, who wrote a book, the whole book about Hazarian in German, and he suggested that Ashkenazic Jews of his time maybe they descend from Khazars. Then there was a large study in Hebrew made in the land of Israel before the creation of Israel by Abraham Pollack, who was a professor of history of Tel Aviv University, history of a Jewish kingdom in Europe, Hazaria, and so in which he also repeated the same idea. He developed it with some additional arguments. And then a British historian, Dunlop, in 1967, wrote a book, History of Jewish Khazars, in which he tried to collect different elements which are known about Khazaria and its relationship to Judaism. And in this book, he also said that perhaps Ashkenazic Jews who live during the last century in Eastern Europe, they can descend from Khazars. But of course, as a professor, typically with typical British approach, he was very careful when he said this, because he said, we have no facts, we have a few arguments, so we cannot assert this, but perhaps it can be true. And then the big revival of this theory starts in 1976, when a renowned author of numerous novels, so a writer, not a scholar, author Kostler, published the book, The 13th Tribe, with subtitle The Khazar Empire and Its Heritage, in which he suggested and emphasized this idea, promoted the idea of Jews from Eastern Europe to be descendants of Khazars who were converted to Judaism during the last century of the first millennium. In this book, in the introduction and in different chapters dealing with of this book, the author Kostler, he explains what was his main motivation for writing, and his main motivation, explicitly said, was he was very as a Jew, he was perturbed by the events of the Second World War, of the Holocaust, and he was trying, I think that can appear strange for readers, but he was trying to prove, or to get evidence that during the Second World War, German Nazis, when they were pretending to kill non-Aryans, when actually they were killing another group of Aryans, because these Jews were not descending from Hebrews of the Bible, not the Jews who migrated from Middle East, but from Khazars, and Khazars, of course, they were Aryans. So it's strange motivation, but it is a real leitmotif throughout his book. What is his method? He oversimplifies what is known historically. He says Khazar kingdom was Jewish. He does not say it was elite was Jewish, just Khazar kingdom was Jewish. He says it is likely that Polish Jews were of Khazar origin, and then he proceeds with a long chapter of the history of Jews in Eastern Europe with the factual data about when Jews appear in this place, in this area, in Poland, Lithuania, Ukraine, Belarus, etc. All this exposure is based on facts, but he used during the whole chapter, long chapter about history, the word Jew and Khazar as interchangeable. So he introduced the idea, the hypothesis that Polish Jews are actually of Khazar kingdom, and he provides a history of a popular history of Polish Jews, but just not calling them Jews. He is calling them Khazars. So it's a very strange method. Of course, it's not historical. Again, he was not historian. He was a renowned author of a number of novels which are very well known, like, for example, Darkness at Midnight, for example, Spartacus, etc. So what are his arguments? His arguments, he say, we can observe that in Eastern Europe we find storytellers and singers who are wandering. So this is typically Oriental. We find some synagogues that have Oriental architecture. We see that some Jews have garments which look Oriental. So for him, everything which is Oriental means their ancestors came from the East, so from Hazaria. Of course, this is for serious scholars. This would, when scholars read such arguments, we can just smile because, for example, synagogues very often they were built during maybe 4, 5, or 6 centuries ago by architects who were not even Jewish, but who could be Italian, Polish, etc. And so they selected the Oriental architectural style just because they were synagogues. So it's a deliberate selection of Oriental architecture. And of course, arguments like that Jews of Eastern Europe have a strange passion for stuffed fish that perhaps correspond to their popular memory of their life on the edge of the Caspian Sea. Of course, again, we can just smile for such kind of arguments. And Yiddish, he say, of course, everybody understands that Yiddish has a German basis, that there is a need to explanation. He say, well, in Crimea, since the first centuries of the first millennium, there were Goths who were living there. So why not, considering that Yiddish could be taken by Khazar Jews from these Gothic Germans in Crimea? But the problem is that Yiddish is not related to this branch of Germanic languages. It is related to the Western, not Eastern part of Germanic languages. So, of course, for any linguist, this link would also just get people smile. But he was not a scholar. And so he was a popular author, and he wrote a kind of novel, historical novel. Another step, I would say even maybe more important, in this propagation of the Khazar theory was in 2008, when the in this case, it's the author was not a writer, but a historian, professional historian, professor of university, Shlomo Zand, who wrote a book, The Invention of the Jewish People, that became international bestseller. It was a bestseller in Israel itself, in the Hebrew original text, in France and in many other countries, because this book was translated to many, many languages. What is the motivation for writing? Here again, it is explicit. The whole introduction is not ambiguous. The author says he wrote this book because he is struggling as a he has a agenda which is purely ideological. He is struggling for democracy in the state of Israel, and for him, it's a shame that this state is just Jewish. It should cease to be continue being Jewish, and so he tried to find different arguments that, according to him, could help this state to become really democratic, according to his definition, and to cease to be Jewish. This is not implicit, it's really explicit. So again, we cannot, he's not hiding his ideology. And main postulate and main content on this book is the idea with all modern Jews, not just Ashkenazic, but globally speaking, all modern Jews are mainly descending from converts to Judaism. And so when I was reading this book, I immediately thought that it was written as a subtitle could be everything you always wanted to know about conversion to Judaism, but we were afraid to ask. Of course, I'm making an allusion to a title of the comedy by Woody Allen. Well, this is the main content of this book. He collected all elements almost exhaustively that are known from various authors about conversions to Judaism at different places and different areas, a different time period and different areas. And these quotes are accurate, actually. So what is not accurate, what can be discussed? So what are his methods? His main method is selective citation, because he quotes many references to people who converted to Judaism, especially during the Antiquity period, much smaller number of examples during the Middle Ages or modern times. But he is very, very detailed in that. But he does not say that this is just a selective citation, because there are many, many other sources that do not speak about conversions. So, of course, there were some conversions. And he permanently claims about conspiracy in Jewish and Israeli historiography. So this is really strange, because all authors, or a large majority, not all, but a large majority of studies he is quoting, they were written by Jewish authors, and many of them even Israeli authors. And so PhD theses, scholarly articles, books, etc. All these sources he is quoting, because he never did any original research. He is just quoting the work done by other scholars, and so all of them, or a very big majority of them, are Jewish. Not all, of course, but a large majority they are Jewish or Israeli, and so it's very strange to read permanently about Jewish and generally speaking, or more particular Israeli authors trying to hide the real facts. So this is really a strange claim. Method and argument. He is oversimplifying. It looks in many cases very close to what Koestler was doing. For example, data about Khazars indicate that the elite was Jewish. How Shlomo Zand, what Shlomo Zand says? For him, there is no, he oversimplifies. All were Jewish. We don't have any element that would say that, quite on the opposite. We have direct quotes from different Muslim travelers who say that a majority of a local population are pagan, some are Christian, some are Muslim, and only the ruling elite is Jewish. But for Sand, it's much simpler. There were some Jews, so he extrapolated, everybody was Jewish. The professor Dunlap says, to assert East European Jewry as the descendants of the Khazars would be to go much beyond what our imperfect records allow. So he asserts, he conjectures something, he provides a hypothesis, but he says that this hypothesis is not really backed strongly by facts. For Shlomo Zand, it's much simpler. Dunlop asserts, I'm quoting from Shlomo Zand, asserts, but he is extremely cautious, and the gist of his work is apprehensive. So for him, for Shlomo Zand, Dunlop is afraid to reveal, to unravel the real truth about the actual Jews who are living now in our world. And he accepts, Shlomo Zand, almost all, if there is an non-mainstream but totally unorthodox idea in some domain that fits his own idea, he immediately quotes from it, and he avoids quoting from others who are mainstream authors who say something totally opposite. An example, he says that he accepts that Yiddish can be of Slavic origin, and we will see from whom he takes this strange idea. And finally, he says, if not from the Khazars, so from where all these millions of Eastern European Jews came from? Here, there is really some issue, because we indeed know that during the last centuries there was a very large number of Jews in Eastern Europe, but we don't have any evidence about mass migration to Eastern Europe from the West. We have evidence about some families, some people migrating, but we don't have any source that would indicate a mass migration from Germany to Eastern Europe, for example. So this is true. The third author who was promoting this theory, he is from another domain, again, scholarly domain, again, professor of Tel Aviv University, but now professor of linguistics, now emeritus, Paul Wexler, who wrote a number of articles and several books. The largest correspond to 2002 and 2021. You see the cover here. So two-tiered relaxification in Yiddish and Silk Road linguistics. What are his ideas? Main postulate, exactly the same as Shlomo Zand. Modern Jews mainly descend from converts. And actually, Paul Wexler also wrote in the past a book that was about Sephardic Jews, and exactly the same idea that he tried to back in his to corroborate by arguments the same idea that Sephardic Jews are not descending from people who came from Middle East. Sephardic Jews are descending from Berbers who got converted to Judaism. And so this is, again, his main idea that he tried to defend in different books and to find arguments. And so for Wexler, he says Yiddish was invented by, in his first article about this topic, by pagan Sorbs, Western Slavs, who, according to him, became converted to Judaism and created artificially Yiddish. In 2002, in the book, he say Sorbs, yes, but also there was a big part of former Khazar speakers who of Eastern who became first speakers of Eastern Slavic, so the ancestor of modern Russian, Ukrainian, and Belarusian languages. And in his last works, he say not only pagan Sorbs, not only Khazar speakers, but numerous other merchants who traveled on the Silk Road, and for not to be understood by non-Jews, they invented a secret language. He calls it Yiddish. And so all of them, except for a few persons, were converted to Judaism. And their ancestors of Ashkenazic Jews, he pretends, they were Turkic or Iranian people. So what are his methods? The methods are strange for people who are working in the domain of historical linguistics, like me, for example. He is proceeding to pure theoretical reconstruction if he ignores available medieval texts and historical facts. He works like as if we have current Yiddish, and he tries to reconstruct what were the previous stages of this language. And he is doing this as if we were not having any texts from previous centuries. So this is really strange, because there are a lot of medieval texts written in the language which is ancestor of Yiddish. And so of course, these texts go their language has nothing to do with the ideas of Webster. He's searching for parallels. So if he find a word that has some sounds between a Yiddish word and let's say Turkish word or Iranian word, he considered that if there is some similarity, these words are related. And if they are not close phonetically, but they have some semantic, so they have some meaning which is close, they should surely be related. And so he is proceeding to free associations. And like that, actually, if we use his method, we can prove that any language is descending from any language. And he used some principle that I call the complexity principle, because normally in the sciences, scholars use the principle of simplicity. So the more simple is the hypothesis, the better it is. For him, he's extremely inventive. So his book, like actually the book by Koster, can be considered to be part of the literature of fantasy, because he's constructing a very he has a very big imagination, and so the stories he is suggesting are very complex with many independent ideas. And so of course for scholars they cannot be close to the truth because there are too many independent hypotheses. And the whole book is written in this style that I would say cryptic method. So what is cryptic? He tries, in the contents, he's tried to reveal a past which was, according to him, intentionally hidden by the ancestors of modern Jews, because they were not Jews, they were Slavs or Khazars or Turkish or Iranian people, etc., who got converted to Judaism, and they decided to hide their past, and so they invented different things, different words, different languages, etc. So the whole idea is cryptic. And Wexler himself, he's coining new terms, he's using a lot of acronyms and symbols. And so when we go to his texts, I will just show you one. I put just a screenshot from one line, and there are thousands of like that. So I'm not sure a human being can understand everything with all this signs. Of course, he explains the meaning of each sign in the introduction, but I think to understand this sentence, we need to have a computer. So he pretends to reveal some hidden, to unravel some hidden things, and he is doing it with a very cryptic method of exposing things in the cryptic, using cryptic approach, and often making assertions which are logically cannot be considered as tenable. Fine, the last person, so fourth among the promoters of this theory is again Israeli-born author who is Eran El-Haik, geneticist. So he wrote several articles on this topic. One of them was of 2012 was called "The Missing Link of Jewish European Ancestry," and he is speaking about Khazars. So this work is different from others because here we are dealing with hard sciences already, genetics. And so since hard sciences are usually considered to be more scientific than even when linguistic, and of course not to speak about history or novels, this is the most scientific approach to this topic. So, and if we look these articles, we can see that there are many, many things which look really superficially as extremely scientific, with mathematical formula, with graphs, with different terminology from genetics, etc., etc. But and so it's not. But the next day after the publication of this, the whole internet was filled by such annonces about this extremely important publication. Science news, different Jewish sites, independent sciences, etc., etc. So many, many sites was announcing the publication of this extremely important achievement of modern genetics. So, what are the methods the author used to say, to assert that Jews, modern Jews, Ashkenazic Jews, are descending from Khazars? How he needed to make a link to some ancient population group, Khazars, that does not exist. The historical sources for already almost 9 centuries, and he based this link on very bold premises. So he said, we need to compare Khazars to biblical Hebrews. We don't have access to the genome of Khazars. We don't have access to the genome of biblical Hebrew. So let's compare something we can compare. So Khazars were living on the northern Caucasus. So let's consider that this is a hypothesis. That Khazars, if we take Georgians and Armenians who live today in Caucasus, we can consider that their genetic behavior should be similar to Khazars. And since we have no access to biblical Hebrews, let's say that modern Palestinian Arabs who are living here, they should certainly, according to him, to El Hayek, be representative with their genetic behavior to what was the genetic behavior of biblical Hebrews, because they live on the same territory. Georgians, Armenians are not living on the same territory of Khazars, and of course they are absolutely unrelated to Khazars. Khazars were on the North Caucasus, from Turkic linguistic group. Georgians and Armenians are from Indo-European linguistic group. Georgians are from Caucasian linguistic group. So all these groups are totally independent from the historical point of view, but for El Hayek, this is not a problem. And so he is actually not comparing Khazar to biblical Hebrews. He's to modern Ashkenaz. He's comparing Georgians and Armenians to Palestinian Arabs. And another very interesting method he introduced is geographic average. And so he says, if we consider a genome of people living in one area and genome of people living in another area, and so if we consider a third group of population, we can see to what population group it is related. And so if we make lines on the map, we can obtain some geographic average that shows where the ancestors lived. So this is a very bold method. And actually, if we look his last publication, we see that the last publication was not just by him, but there was someone who we discussed already, and Paul Wexler, and actually all linguistic elements in this genetic were just not only direct quotes from Wexler, but some additional ideas of Wexler about Ashkenazic Jews being descendants of Irano-Turko-Slavic people, etc. So all this table is clearly a quote from linguistic works by Paul Wexler. And so just an illustration of geographic average of method used by Al-Haik. So origin of Barack Obama. We know that his father was from Kenya and his mother was from a family whose ancestors lived in the United Kingdom. So if we put these 2 points, I selected London, but it could be maybe any other place in the United Kingdom and any place in Kenya. And if for this line we find a middle of this line, it will be Libya. And so will we say that Barack Obama, if we test his genome, but that he is of Libyan origin? Certainly not, of course. But if we apply this method to areas where people never moved or moved very in small small numbers of population, for example, Sardinia, people were not moving from they were often living for centuries in the same village. Of course, this method will be applicable, but once we try to apply it to people who migrated, Jews are par excellence as people who made a numerous migration. Of course, this method cannot be applied at all. So what are the other methods, in addition to historical, of course, that can shed some light about the actual past of Ashkenazic people or other groups of population? But of course, I will speak only about Ashkenazic Jews. Now, my domain, my scholarly domain, is historical, linguistic, and onomastic, and so all my studies, their aim is to use this historical, linguistic, and onomastic methods to find the direction of migration. So from the analysis using this method, what can we learn? We can learn, first of all, it is even without this method, what we really know from history, from historical documents. We know that during the 10th and 11th centuries, there were 3 centers of Jews who were living in the territories on which during the next century there were Ashkenazic Jews who were living. Western Germany, so on the Rhine, what I call Czech Jews, so in Prague and its surrounding, and in the territory of Ukraine and Belarus. So we will see how these 3 centers are related and how they are related to modern Ashkenazic Jews. So if we consider the history of Yiddish that was spoken during the last century in the Eastern Europe by all Eastern European Jews, we can find that, of course, by grammar, basic vocabulary, etc., it comes from German medieval dialects. So Jews borrow it from their German neighbors, the basis of the language. But there are also some elements which can be which were inherited from ancestors of Jews who were not speaking German yet. And so we find in this small layer, which is almost purely lexical, so just words, there are no phonetic, no grammatical rules, everything concerning grammar comes from German, but some words reveal the languages that were spoken by the ancestors of people who were speaking during the last centuries Eastern Yiddish. And so we can find that there are Hebrew, Aramaic, a few Greek words, there are old French words for sure, and there are old Czech words. There is not a single Turkic word that could be inherited. And this should be the case. We would need to have at least a few words of Turkic origin if the majority of ancestors of Eastern European Jews were Turkic-speaking Khazars. Of course, for ancestry, elements that were not inherited, but that were borrowed horizontally during the next century when the Jews were living already in Eastern Europe, they are of no importance, of course. There were Polish, Ukrainian, Russian, Belarusian words that were, some of them, some Polish words were already borrowed during the Middle Age, at the end of the Middle Ages. But again, they were really borrowed. They were not inherited from people, from ancestors who were speaking another language, a language which was not German based. And of course, there are some Hebrew and Aramaic words that were not inherited, but that were borrowed from Jewish texts, from liturgy, from the Bible, from prayers, etc. And if we consider another method, so Jewish given names, we can see exactly the same results. So what were the given names that were inherited from ancestors? Were of Hebrew, Aramaic, Greek, German, Old French, Old Czech origin only. There is no single name that would be inherited from Turkic-speaking ancestors. And all Slavic names were not inherited. They were borrowed already when Jews were already living in Eastern Europe. Maybe I will not spend time on how can, what are the methods, this is were known by linguists, what are the methods that allow to distinguish between inherited and borrowed elements. But there is a lot of methods. And so, of course, in my books, in my studies, I used just a few words about this. Of course, chronology of references. Some words are very rarely borrowed, for example, articles, body parts, numerals, and religious terms were never borrowed from a language of people who are not professing the same religion. So using all these methods, we can distinguish, we can tell for various words whether they were inherited from ancestors or borrowed horizontally already when Jews were living already in the new area. And so according to this analysis, both linguistic and onomastic, it is clear that there were three centers from which Ashkenazic Jews, ancestors of Ashkenazic Jews, came. Very important center was Rhineland, so West Germany, because very, very large number of given names originated there in the Middle Ages. And so we can follow up their path from Western Europe to Central Europe, from Central Europe to Eastern Europe. Important, very important source was also Czech lands, where Jews were living also already at the turn of the second millennium, and marginal source or maybe medium of Jews who lived during the Middle Ages, beginning of second millennium in the territory of modern Ukraine and Belarus. So the scheme of how Eastern European Jews were created is according, if we apply all elements from history, from demography, from linguistics, and from onomastics, all of this method combined provide this picture. So Jews from Western Europe, Western Germany, they came eastward to Central Europe. Jews who were living in the at the turn of the second millennium, they came to the north and to the east and to the southeast, and so like that they populated Poland. And among Jews who came from Central Europe to Poland, some were of partly Czech Jewish origin, and some were had as their ancestors Rhenish Jews who first came here and then several generations later migrated eastward to Poland. And from Poland, they came to Lithuania, to Belarus, to Ukraine, to Romania, Hungary, etc. And so here we met a small group of Jews who were living here, and the number of people who came from the West was much larger than the number of Jews who were living here at the turn of the second millennium. So who were these Jews who lived at the turn of the second millennium? What do we know about them? Because this group can be the only channel throughout which Khazars who lived here could provide some contribution. Only this group. So what do we know about this group? Jews who lived in the Middle Ages. So we know that after the Mongol invasion of the beginning of the 13th century, Jews are known only in Western Ukraine. So the only part that was not taken by Mongols, but in all other areas, Jewish community, for example, in Kiev and Chernigov, they were destroyed. But the only area that region called, or Ukraine called Volhynia or Galicia, Jews continued to live. It's Western Europe, Western Ukraine, and at least since the 14th century, we have some references in Western Belarus. We know also from historical sources that some of their scholars who lived in this community were Ashkenazic, but just a few of them. We don't know. There is no reason to consider that the whole community came from the West. And origin of others is really unknown, but there is no reason to consider them to be either of Western or of convert origin. Actually, there is absolutely no fact, no argument that would show that they were converts or descending from converts. Absolutely not a single one. But according to some indirect cultural and geographic arguments, it's logical to consider that at least one part came there from the Byzantium, from Byzantine Empire. Maybe some of them came from Khazaria. Those who came from Khazaria, they could be of Jewish origin, of convert Khazarian origin as well. This is everything is possible, but we are just pure guess because we have no information at all from where they came. We know that they were speakers of local Eastern Slavic languages before 15th and 16th centuries, and from them there is no linguistic legacy at all. So we don't find during the next century any legacy from linguistic legacy from this group. We have just a really tiny, we have a peculiar set of given names, but we have a tiny onomastic legacy. I was able to find 3 given names that correspond to this group of Slavic speaking Jews who were Slavic speaking during the 14th, 15th, 16th century. And so that means that their part was very small in what later became known during the last century as Ashkenazic Jews. So what was the influence of Western migrants? We have partial results of censuses that were made in the mid-16th century in Eastern Europe. So it was territory of Great Duchy of Lithuania. So now it corresponds to Belarus and Lithuania. And they show that the Jewish population living at that period, mid-16th century, in this area was quite small. And even if we apply huge population growth rates, which are impossible for this area, we will never reach the number of Jews, millions of Jews who were living at the end of the 18th century in the same territory. So without conjecturing massive migration from somewhere, but of course there is only one direction from the west, whereas there were no Jews there is no trace of any migration from any other area than the west of Eastern Europe, so from Central Europe, we cannot explain the population for the end of the 18th century. And the influence of migrants from Central and Eastern Europe was not just cultural. Of course, there was cultural influence because everybody started to speak Yiddish, the language that was born in Central Europe, and the religious rites are also from the West, but this is cultural. But we have numerous inherited given names, and so it's not just cultural. It's really there is a legacy of ancestors and not just cultural legacy. And Yiddish became the native language of all Jews of Eastern Europe during the 16th century, 17th century. So how was it possible? How can we explain this fact without conjecturing the mass migration from the West? So, of course, we have in the history some cases when small groups of conquerors come to a territory where there is a big autochthonous population, and they turn it to their language. So, of course, we have this situation with Romans who came to, for example, to France, and France, what became France later, of course, to Gallia. And so Gallia was populated by Celts, and Celtic language was abandoned, and Latin became the basis for language. And we also know, of course, cases of Spanish people who conquered Latin America, and even in countries like Mexico and Peru, where local population was much more populous than the number of Spaniards who came, the local population became Spanish speaking. So, of course, we have such cases when a small group of population change the language of another bigger group of population, local population. But for Jews, it's totally different, because here is what the people who consider that Khazar theory can be true. This is what they consider. Yiddish speakers, according to these people who are promoting Khazar theory, they say it was a very small group of Yiddish speakers who were culturally rabbis, physicians, etc. So culturally dominated Slavic-speaking Jews who were living in this area, and so they turned them to their language. But consider the difference between the previous slide and this one. Here, there are three actors, not only migrants from Central Europe who were Yiddish speakers, and Jews who were Slavic speaking, but these Slavic speakers were living in the area where the big majority, non-Jewish, so Christian majority, was speaking the same language as with Jews. And so for this small group to turn this bigger group who was living in the neighborhood of Gentile, a neighborhood where Gentiles were speaking exactly the same language as with Jews, except for some religious terms. This we don't know. Such cases are absolutely unknown in the history. And so Yiddish could not be learned from rabbis because it became a winner in a very particular and favorable linguistic context. And what is extremely important, Yiddish, spoken by migrants from Central Europe, was not a prestige language. Prestige language was Hebrew and Aramaic. Yiddish was just everyday vernacular language. And so even if local male Jews could learn Yiddish in elementary schools, girls were not going to elementary schools, and girls could there was no education for girls, and so we were speaking the daily languages. So from the 16th century, all Jews of Eastern Europe were already Yiddish speaker, not just males, but females as well. So, of course, learning Yiddish could not be learned. It was really inherited by ancestors. And so the actual picture is surely like that. There was a small group of Slavic Jews of heterogeneous origin, and there was a big number of Yiddish speakers who came to this area, who turned with Jews also to Yiddish speaker. And they dwarfed by their numbers those who were living here. There were no mass migration simultaneous, but there was a continuous migration during several centuries from Central Europe to Eastern Europe. And so this is my last slide, how I see the proportion of importance of different medieval centers for the formation of Eastern European Jews. Very small of East Slavic Jews, of which only a few ones could be of Khazar origin. Much larger source are Czech Jews who came, who switched to Yiddish and who came later to Eastern Europe. And the biggest source was Western European Jews from Western Germany who migrated to Central Europe and then to Eastern Europe. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that, Dr. Beider. I'm interested in getting into Q&A, if that's okay. Would that work for you?
Yes, of course.
Excellent. I'll try and read it slow because I can tell your first language is not English, but that's okay. I'm curious to see if anyone has any critical responses. Feel free to super chat your questions, your comments, whatever. As long as you're respectful, I will take questions from you. Please do not be derogatory in your responses, but I'm curious to see if anyone has an interesting takes, and then I might have questions myself as we get into this. So thank you. Dalai Lama, I want to give a shout out to those who helped support us earlier. Just helping keep the doors open. Cheers. Thank you for the support to the channel. I'm trying to educate people because I think the facts will help us to learn from history and how to treat others and such. So there's a lot to be learning. Walka, thank you so much. Also, I'll help too then, and I appreciate that. And then Walka said, Myth Vision has helped me develop stronger in my understanding and introduced me to a lot of other scholars. Well, today you're introduced to another one. Mr. Monster said, I used to think my grandmother was descended from the Khazar, but my DNA test shows Eastern European Ashkenazi, so Germany, Poland, Belarus. And then followed up to say, before that, my DNA shows heavy Roman interactions. And then before that, it shows a few DNA matchups for people who lived in 1150 BC Ashkelon. I don't know. Do you want to comment on that?
Well, I think it's very the most fashionable method now of speaking about ancestry is using genetic tests, of course. But when we are we're comparing genetic data, of course, genetics is very strong in fighting, in saying that two modern persons are related. There is no doubt here. When I, for example, used my own tests, the site immediately told me that among people who already made the same test, there are some persons who are related to me. And indeed, these were my first cousin and my sister. So there is I knew them already before. And so for this, there is no problem. Now, when people say speak about, again, comparing modern groups, I see no problem. But when people say we are related to some people who lived 2,000 years before, we should be certain that the data that we have about people who lived 2,000 years before, they are reliable. So, for example, if someone says that I have 5% with Jews who lived in the biblical times, I will not agree, because I don't see how, in principle, we don't have a DNA of Jews who were living there 2,000 years ago. But now there are some new methods that I think allow to come closer to the truth. And for example, a few months ago, there was a publication of a genetic study of Jewish cemetery from Erfurt in Eastern Germany. And it was done by extracting DNA from the teeth from the cemetery. So formally it is authorized according to Jewish law. So there was some some data that were extracted from the teeth of people who were buried in this cemetery. And so now we have some data about Jews who lived in Eastern Germany in 12th and 13th century. And so this project just started, actually. I think this is the future for such, if this direction will be continued, and I'm sure that this will continue, just finding rests of Jews who were buried in different cemeteries hundreds years ago, 1,000 years ago, can provide us some DNA materials to which we can make a comparison. But this study that just started, actually.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Monster. My buddy Steven, thank you so much for the super chat. If the so-called mountain Jews of the Caucasus region are an offshoot of Persian Jews, would they be considered Mizrahi?
Yeah, this is a question of definition, of course. So mountain Jews of Caucasus, what we know about them, there are big chances that they're related to Jews of Persia. This is just chances, but we cannot be sure. For example, we can say this, which much more it's much more reliable to say that Jews from the Bukharan Jews from modern Uzbekistan, they are Persian Jews, because their language is of Persian origin. But mountain Jews, no, we are not using language with Persian origin. But there are big chances, I think, that they are really of Persian, at least partially of Persian origin. And now, what do we call Mizrahi? It's a really question of the definition. If by Mizrahi we understand Jews who lived during the last generation in areas where the majority was Muslim, and this is the most commonly accepted definition. Of course, this is applicable to mountain Jews because they lived in Azerbaijan and Dagestan, where the majority was Muslim. And so they would be Mizrahi according to this definition without relationship to Persia, of course.
And just an interesting note in the super chat is the Babylonian Talmud in what we would call modern day Iraq. The Jews that wrote that Babylonian Talmud, wouldn't they have been under Persian occupation while writing the Babylonian Talmud? Does that help us connect to this group in some way, the people who helped write the Babylonian Talmud using historiography? Mm-hmm. Can't we kind of connect some of these dots?
Mm-hmm. I did not make yet comparison of given names, but I'm currently working on the book which will be called Dictionary of Jewish surnames from the Ottoman Empire. And so I wrote already a chapter about Iraqi Jews. And so what I see when I studied in detail last names and rather superficially until this moment, first names used by Iraqi Jews, I see that they are clearly not of Sephardic origin. Their ancestors never lived in Spain. They never came from Western Europe or from Eastern Europe. They really local Oriental, so Mizrahi Jews, and so the odds are really very high that their ancestors came from the land or from the territory that today correspond to Israel. One part could be related to Babylonian, of course, captivity, but other could come later, of course, after the Babylonian Talmud, just when the territory of modern Israel was devastated by different wars during the Roman period, etc. So we cannot say whether all of them are related to Babylonian captivity later, but definitely they are not related. They are related neither to Ashkenazic nor to Sephardic Jews.
Thank you. Thank you for that super chat there, Stephen. Mr. Monster's back. So basically it shows Ascalon, then Rome, then Belarus. I love your channel and I love the guests you bring. Thank you. I love it when you're in the chat, Mr. Monster. I appreciate that. I hope your day is going to be great. Continuing down here, I've got another question. Dan Jacobs, thank you for the super chat. Dr. B explains the mainstream view. Ashkenazi Jews came to Germany, then Eastern Europe via Italy. Critical to say that they came to Italy from Judea, Palestine.
No, I don't agree with I explained the mainstream view. If you remain, the mainstream view was that Jews were coming from Western Europe to Central Europe and to Eastern Europe. My view is more nuanced because I said that there were three groups. They were not just Western Jews. They were also Central European Jews, the Czech Jews, who also contributed, and their ancestors never came from Western Germany. So there were three sources of which Eastern Jews were marginal, but not only German Jews, the Czech Jews were important as well. So this is just a small correction for the first sentence. Now, second is, the question is from where German Jews came and from where Czech Jews came.
Right.
And so German Jews, according to my studies of Yiddish and of given names, their ancestors came to Western Germany from northern France. Now, the question is from where Jews came to northern France.
Right.
And here...
And it keeps happening.
My answer is from southern France. Not from Italy. For me, very few Jews came from Italy to Ashkenazic, to Western Germany. It's really from northern France, and to northern France from southern France. Now the question, from where Jews came to southern France? And here I agree. They could not come from any other place than Italy. And it is from Italy. So during the Roman times and later, they came to southern France. Some of them came from southern France to northern Spain. Others came from different routes to southern Spain through North Africa. Now, from where Jews came to Italy, and surely all the oldest community and the oldest one are from Rome and from different cities in southern Italy, so like such areas as Sicily, Apulia, Calabria, Naples, etc. So the most logical path is really from there is no other possibility than from the east, so from Palestine, Judea, etc.
Isn't it and I love this question that Dan brings up, and I like how you kept going, if they came from here, then where did they come from, and where did they come from, and where did they come from? Is it difficult because of the change in Second Temple Judaism? Jews started getting very comfortable living in a diaspora. So we have written record, archaeological data, inscriptions, the whole nine, on all of these diaspora synagogues and such, that they were totally content not living in Judea, Palestine. So this is a difficult problem as well for people who want to try and go, oh, well, let's say we point out a location where a group identifies as Jews in Roman occupation or something. And someone looks at that and goes, they're not Jewish because they're not from Israel, Palestine. And it's like, no, we have good reason to think they were comfortable living outside of that land. So you can't say they weren't Jews. You can't, technically, probably in some cases, you can't prove they were. But there's good reason to think that they probably were comfortable living outside of the land. And would you say that's one of the difficulties in dealing with this issue, is Jews living outside of Israel, Palestine, and being content in a diaspora?
Well, for the antiquity period, of course, we have numerous sources that speak about conversion of individual person, not of conversion of people to of big population group, but of specific persons, Romans, or not necessarily Rome, Greeks. For example, of course, the most famous examples were first translators of the Bible from Hebrew to Aramaic. He was converted to Judaism. The most celebrated translator to Greek. So the first translation to Greek, Septuagint, of course, it was done in Alexandria by a big group of Hellenistic Jews. But since the moment Christians became using this translation, Jews created for themselves a new translation to Greek, and it was done by Agrippa, who was again a convert to Judaism. So we have example of individual persons, of very even famous scholars of the Talmud who were Romans, Greeks, or other. But then the antiquity period stops, and Judaism stops to being the only monotheistic religion in this area, and Christianity becomes, especially after the moment Christianity becomes a state religion of the Roman state by Constantine. So starting with this moment, there were no motivation, less motivation for people to become Jewish now. And beginning with this moment, I think the number of conversion to Judaism became much smaller, and then a few centuries later, it was really prohibited to be conversion became prohibited. Centuries in Eastern Europe and Western Europe, any Christian countries, any conversion to Judaism, people were sentenced to death, of course, immediately. So it was really impossible to do. So this is concerning conversion. But diaspora, well, what we see some ways of migration from Palestine, from antiquity to the north, to Iraq, to Syria. This migration are well documented. We know about the existence of Jewish groups in Rome, in other Roman settlements in North Africa, for example, in Spain, even before, not even before Arabs came there, but even before West Goth came there. So we have some information about that, but it is really scarce, and what we can really so it's difficult to say something with any degree of certainty. But from starting from the Middle Ages, we can assert many things being with arguments which I find can be very strong.
This is a good point to bring up a question I have. If I may, I asked a gentleman who believes that when 70 AD, the destruction of the Jerusalem temple happened, it's part of his faith. Just like in your presentation, some of these people, the authors, will say, well, I want to democratize modern Israeli state, which, by the way, I'm no Zionist. Okay. So I mentioned this before the show,
For me, there is no problem here as well. But for me, the problem is not people can have any ideology. I accept people following any ideology. What I do not accept is if they use their ideology to bias scholarly methods. So
that's
I try to find the answer to questions which are scholarly. That means we have a topic and we need to say whether it is true or false. And we don't need to say whether it is good or bad. And every ideology is really good or bad. For me, it's everyone has some ideology. But the answers we need to we're trying to say to find are not concerning what is good, what is bad, but what is true and what is false. And so this is what I'm trying to do.
And that's what I'm leading into, is pointing out that some people have motivations, and those motivations affect their conclusions. And I just want to get to the evidence, right? Because I have no dog in this fight, but I am curious to know why there's so much animosity on both sides, and that can happen. So I asked this question, and this is to a guy named Don Preston, who's he's a pastor of Church of God. And he believes that God has planned, he's actively involved in the destruction of the Jerusalem temple. It was what God wanted. And in a sense, you could say that the people of Christ replaced the people of Israel. So God kind of gets rid of, the chosen people, if you want to use the term, or technically Jews, right? So I asked this question: do you think there are ethnic Israelites or Jews still around today, ethnically? And he says, I'm sure that there are some folks out there with the DNA of Abraham in them, which I don't even know if Abraham existed, but that's a whole different question. Anyway, but as virtually all sources agree, there is no homogeneous group or nation descended from Abraham. But of course, with utter destruction of all of the genealogies in AD 70, that makes it impossible for anyone to prove who they are. And that is, of course, the real issue.
For me, the issue, the destruction of the chain, cultural and genealogical chain, lays later. For me, the biggest problem. So why I'm interested, and I'm working only starting with the Middle Ages, and to be more specific, 10th century, because for centuries which are before, these are the centuries of the Dark Ages, and we have almost nothing for this period after the destruction of Roman Empire. So we have many sources for Roman Empire, for Greek kingdoms, etc. But then we have Dark Ages, during which we have very small number of elements that we could use, historical, linguistic, onomastic, etc., that we could use to find some evidence. And so this is for example, if I speak just for my domain, so onomastics, which is study of names, and linguistics, historical linguistics, this period is really crucial, because during this period, Jews, before this period, before the Dark Ages, for example, Jews who were living at Rome, they were using Latin and Greek first names. They were almost not using Jewish names, very few Jewish names, and they were not speaking Hebrew. Even during their prayers, they were using, at Rome at least, during the last century of the Roman Empire, in the catacombs, for example, and the tombstones, we have a lot of catacombs with tombstones, Jewish tombstones. And so we can learn that people were using Greek and Latin first names, some Hebrew names, but they were not using Hebrew even for liturgy, because they are making quotes on the tombstones from Greek translation. So Greek was their cultural language. And so, and in the Middle East, Jews who were living there, they were using Aramaic as their cultural language, the language that was not spoken just by Jews, but by everybody in this area at that period. And after the collapse of Roman Empire and the Arabic expansion, Aramaic disappeared, almost disappeared, except for some Kurdistan area, and also Latin. So Roman Empire was destroyed, and so during this period, many population groups reoriented themselves culturally, and Jews reacquired Hebrew as their, in all countries, they reacquired Hebrew as their unique cultural language, because their cultural language they were using for previous centuries, Greek and Aramaic, became languages of areas that were destroyed, culturally destroyed. So there was a big change from, so there was not a linear development. It was a big crisis with a big change in from the linguistic point of view, from the nomastic point of view, and so, and almost no documents for this period. So this is why we can speak a lot of, we can tell about biblical periods and until the end of the Roman Empire. We can speak, we can discuss at detail many things from starting from the 10th century and later. But this period between the two dark ages, they make any ideology. If someone has a strong idea about what occurred, what is the link between what was before this period and after this period, it would be based on ideology rather than on facts, because we have no information.
Thank you for that. And just to follow up on Dan's question that we talked about earlier, you already answered this, but to just be clear, because Dan messaged me, I'm friends with Dan, and he said, I think he's missing my point, he said, which is that Ashkenazi Jews came from Palestine originally. He hasn't really made that very clear. So he wanted to know if you thought that Ashkenazi Jews originally come from Palestine or Judea.
I believe in that. But what I can show as evidence that the majority of their ancestors came from Germany, Western Germany, from Western Germany to they came from France. From France, logically they came from Italy. Now the link between Palestine, Judea, and Rome, again, logically, the largest part of this group who lived at Rome in this period, logically, they were of Palestinian, so Judean, so Hebrew origin. But again, he is more my belief than some strong evidence.
Okay.
And this can be, I think, unraveled again if we start to analyze if there are some remnants from, for example, Roman catacombs. And if we find whether the genetic material that can be extracted, where it shows that Jews were of different origin than the non-Jews who were living in Rome. And certainly there will be some small correlation, but whether it will be small or very big, I don't know. And when there is a correlation between Jews who lived at Rome and Ashkenazic, logically, yes. But again, here are just conjectures, just hypotheses. And I do believe, but it's a belief. It's not, I have no proof.
Thank you so much.
In any case, I think what people can, where I see people are often making confusion. If people say, if they assert that Ashkenazic Jews, their ancestors were Khazars, for example, what I can do, I cannot prove that they were not Khazars, but I cannot prove that I can prove that the methods used and the arguments used by people who were backing the Khazar theory, they are senseless. They are really bad. So they are untenable. And so I can suggest some other methods which are much more correlated with all information we have, and that show that at least one part came, a big part came from Western Germany. But again, we continue, we come to Rome, and from where Jews came to Rome, I believe from Judea, but this is my belief.
Oh, there's so many interesting things to discuss. And I really thought it was interesting, the 13th tribe, how he's trying to say, stop, you're killing your own people, technically. And how that has been used as a weapon against Jews in many ways. So thank you so much for your time. If I may, let me give another plug here for everybody in the chat. Thank you for all the super chats, the questions that you asked, the comments, the encouragements and things. You help keep us alive here at Myth Vision. I truly appreciate that. Go check out his books on Amazon. If you want to go read further, go see what Dr. Beider has to say on these topics. And of course, I appreciate him taking a more empirical approach and then drawing the line where he can't prove, but giving his gist of the direction of where he thinks things go and why. This was such a wonderful presentation, and I hope that people watching were able to keep up and understand everything that was being said. He has a YouTube channel as well. Go join Myth Vision's Patreon. I do a lot of work. I'm trying to bring you guys education. We have a lot of stuff coming out. I've got to edit. Tons of videos coming. We also have online college level courses for the common people who don't have access to Yale or Harvard, or we have those scholars showing up here on our links in the description. So go join one of the courses, go educate yourself. And anyway, I want to give you the chance to have your final words to our audience today. What would you sum the discussion up as? If you don't mind, give us your thoughts.
Well, I think it is, again, I said it, it is not a problem to have an ideology. But I think what is a problem if you consider that your ideology is the true one. The good one, yes, for you, for some other people. But the true one, no. Ideology cannot be true. Ideology could be good or false, but not true. A true or false, this is a totally different domain, and this is domain of science and not of our beliefs.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. Everybody hit the like button, share this out to someone who is pushing the Khazar myth. And until next time, we are Myth Vision.